Hi, everyone. This is Sam Silverman, Managing Partner of EB5AN. Thank you for taking time to join us on today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about EB5 visa I-526E statistics, specifically rural versus non-rural filings by country. And we're going to be going through some of the newest available Freedom of Information Act data that we just received over the last couple of days. All right, to start, quick overview about EB5AN. We're a leading EB5 investment fund manager. We've worked with more than 2,000 investors from more than 70 different countries. Our regional centers cover most of the United States. One of the things that sets us apart from many of the other EB5 regional center operators is a commitment to investment transparency. And we've got a lot of information on questions to ask, information that you should be reviewing, financial statements, etc., in all of our documents and materials and blog posts on our website that are helpful to review. We've also published over 1,000 YouTube videos as well, all on our YouTube channel for investors to get more details about information on how to select a safe immigration project and also a safe project from a financial perspective as well. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Sam Silverman, one of the two managing partners, and joined today with my partner, Mike Schoenfeld, and I'll let Mike jump in and introduce himself and share a little bit about his background and about the genesis for our company.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam. Really appreciate everybody taking the time today to be on the webinar to run through some of the new data that's available now. But as you can see from our backgrounds, both Sam and I worked at the Boston Consulting Group before I went into private equity. And over the past decade, we've built EB5AN to be one of the leaders in just being institutional and transparent. We focus on making sure that we follow best practices in the playbook of structuring high quality deals to minimize immigration financial risk, and have been very successful in doing that over the past 10 years.
All right, perfect. And we also have Ahmed Khan with us today, an experienced EB5 immigration attorney and regional center executive on our team. And I'll let Ahmed jump in and introduce himself and share a little bit about his experience in EB5.
Yep, thanks, Sam. My name is Ahmed Khan. I'm Senior Vice President here at EB5AN. I've been an executive at various top regional centers over the last 6 years. And before that, I was a practicing immigration attorney with about 8 years of experience in EB5 as well as other categories. So just knowing how the visa bulletin plays out and things like that, I think I bring a lot of experience today to our webinar and being able to kind of share my experience over the years and how that all works. So excited to be here.
All right, great. As I mentioned earlier, we're one of the few regional centers that covers the entire continental United States, which means we can select projects in any geographic area. We're not limited to any particular region of the country. And we've worked with investors from around the world. Also, many of our articles and projects have been featured in some of the leading publications around the world as well. All right, so let's jump into some of the key material for today, starting with some of the latest data showing rural versus non-rural I-526E petitions by country. And first, before we do that, a special thanks to AIIA and the Galati Law Firm for their work in the FOIA requests that were required for us to acquire this new filing data from USCIS. All right, Ahmed, do you want to kind of give us a high-level walkthrough of this new data that we have, and then Mike, follow up with some commentary on how this trend has been evolving over the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. So here we've kind of got a breakdown in two different things, right? We see the total number of filings through January of this year and the breakdown between urban and rural applications, which is pretty important. But then we also, through the FOIA request, are able to obtain a little bit of a further demographic breakdown by country. And there's not anything really surprising in the most latest update. It really is kind of a proliferation of what we had already seen over the previous 2 years, the first 2 years post RIA. We've definitely seen rural start to catch up to urban, although we've definitely had quite a few people and pundits say, oh, rural is definitely going to outpace urban. And it's starting to get to where it's even, but you can still see that urban filings are still at a pretty high number and continue to outpace rural based on this latest data set. As always, China continues to dominate and be one of if the biggest market for EB5. India kind of not a close second, but let's say a 50% second there. And then what I think has always been kind of surprising over the last few years and kind of great to see, but it does create some further complications for Chinese and Indian investors is the rest of the world continuing to grow and take over more of a market share and file more and more applications. And there are some dominant countries even in this category: Taiwan, Korea, Brazil, Vietnam, kind of the usual suspects. But we've also seen some very new countries enter the mix. Everywhere from Canada, Mexico, Turkey, some European countries as well. So yeah, it's always interesting to see how EB5 has grown across the world, not just in China and India, but yes, those two continue to kind of dominate the filings that we're seeing. I think the trend that we've basically seen initially was a lot of urban filings, very few rural. Over the last year, we've kind of seen this rural number start to catch up, so that it clearly indicates that there's more rural applications being filed, especially by Chinese and Indian investors. But urban continues to kind of grow at a non-zero number as well. So there are still Chinese, Indian, and definitely rest of world investors choosing the urban high unemployment TEA category for their filings as well.
Perfect, thanks. And yeah, just to add a little bit more here. So as we can see, we're approaching and are likely well past 10,000 total I-526E receipts since the passage of the Reform and Integrity Act. So we're at this point about 3 years in after the RIA passed, although it took a little bit of time after that for applications to start rolling in. So we're now where the program is back stabilized and showing good numbers. And as Ahmed mentioned, it definitely started with high unemployment, urban areas being much more of the preference. And lately it has shifted, especially for China, to where rural is the preference, significantly outweighing HUA. And as you can see now, for the first time in data that we've seen, as an overall piece of the pie, rural is slightly above urban for China. For India, it's still the other way, where the high unemployment still has outpaced rural in an overall category. But we are seeing those trend lines to where it is definitely going more towards the rural 20% set-asides as investors understand how long that line is looking for that urban category for eventually getting through if they have to rely on just the set-aside visas.
Great. Thanks, Mike. All right, let's move to the next slide.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So looking at the next slide, and we've had a version of the slide for the last 2 years or 2.5 years since we started getting this data that was granular on the urban versus rural. We've continued to try to do the analysis of what does it look like in terms of how many investors have filed versus what that's going to lead to in terms of green cards needed and what that means in terms of shortages or surpluses for a backlog. Of course, this is not perfect. There are a bunch of caveats here that I would put in, especially that this doesn't include any of those investors that filed that have already received their conditional green cards, which many have, especially in the rural category. People are already getting physical green cards. So it's not a science in exactly precise, but it is directionally correct in rough magnitude, correct when you look at it. So what you can see is that in total, if you look at the number of investors that have filed in the rural category versus the urban category, and assuming about two visas will be needed per applicant, which based on historical averages could be a little bit low, just depends on approval rates. You can see that the total visas required for the high unemployment, the urban category, is over 10,000, and we're at, let's say, about 8,600 needed for the rural category. The good news is that we do have the rollover. It would be nice if USCI, if they would continue issuing more of these along the year so we don't lose any this year. We'll see what they do for the rest of the fiscal year. But overall, in a worst case scenario for us, which is we don't take into account any investors that have already gotten their conditional green card and would not be included in here. It looks to us like probably about a 2-year wait in the rural category for enough visas to be available for everyone. Maybe you've even pushed that to 3 years, which gives 6,000, which is well more than the 4,000 shortage that we're estimating. Versus in the high unemployment category, to us, it's clear whether you think it's 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, it is going to be a very long wait for investors that get into that urban high unemployment category to actually get their green card. The good news is the visa bulletin has continued to stay current. So for investors that choose either urban or rural today, you can adjust status if you're within the US and get a lot of those benefits. And we do have heard from some investors, they don't care how long it takes to get that conditional green card as long as they can adjust. And that could be a very good justification. Although we are hearing from more investors with the data coming out, they prefer to just get through the process and get it all finalized as soon as possible. And in that case, rural has both faster processing and a shorter wait in terms of actually getting the physical green card itself and getting through that piece of the process. So just overall, we've had the slide, and you can go back to prior decks. You can see how our analysis has looked and how it's changed in terms of predictions. But really, it's gone somewhat according to what we expected along the way in terms of more people shifting towards rural, but still the overall majority has been high unemployment.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Mike. I think that's a really good analysis of kind of what we're seeing here. And I think it was Ron Klasko that did a webinar with us a couple months back that kind of mentioned the same thing to investors, which was, look, if you're looking at EB5 today, your long-term outlook really isn't changing, right? The people that are in line ahead of you are going to continue to be in line ahead of you. So, the visa backlogs, the visa bulletin, all this stuff, it kind of changes your immediate or the immediacy in which you're making this decision. But what we're trying to illustrate here is kind of a conservative, worst case scenario so that investors can set realistic expectations of what their wait time could be from the day that they file to the day that they obtain a green card. And again, this is meant, kind of to illustrate to investors the differentiation between those two categories. And then to Mike's point, there's no one size fits all, or one project fits all, or one category that fits all. Every investor will have different priorities, and they can kind of look to this data, understand the projections, understand kind of where they fall on the spectrum of timeline and what they're looking for, and then make a more informed decision. So this data, there's a lot of factors and variables that, no one can really predict, not even the government, who's kind of in charge of this stuff. But with all this data at hand and AIIA and the Lottie Law going out and getting this data, it's really put investors in a good position to make a truly informed decision about where their funds should be going and what they can expect out of their EB5 immigration process.
Perfect. Thanks, Ahmed.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, guys. All right, let's break down this data and look at it on a monthly basis and see what's been happening, particularly over the last couple of months. Ahmed, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a pretty, if you're in the industry, especially on the regional center side, you've kind of seen this play out in real time. We kind of saw that immediate influx in August and September of 2022 of projects that were pretty much like carryover from pre-RIA, right? They were already created. They somehow met the new criteria for high unemployment or rural, and they were able to kind of jump into the market and get investors quickly. We saw that drop off then in 2023, and as projects kind of worked on their documentation, got it ready, brought those projects to market, and then demand steadily increased right up until early 2024 when we saw this gigantic increase in March of 2024, which was basically created by an increase in the filing fees across the board, especially with EB5. And yeah, it tripled pretty much overnight. And so a lot of investors who were kind of on the fence saw this as an opportunity to gain some advantage, get their filings in, and basically make sure that they locked in their spots before the fees increased. From there, demand has been pretty steady, although you can see that it's pretty much been growing on a month-to-month basis. More and more people are applying And then what we've seen that wasn't kind of part of the confirmed data is that ever since President Trump announced the possibility of a gold card coming in and replacing the EB-5 visa, that pushed a lot of demand forward. So, whether or not a gold card will actually come to fruition, it seems very unlikely based on what we've heard and seen from the administration since then, that any such program would even replace the EB-5 visa. But definitely that fear that it instilled in a lot of people that, okay, EB-5 might be going away, brought a lot of that demand forward, and we've seen a huge increase in filings in Q1 of 2025. And so that's probably going to be reflected in the next data set that we get. And we'll talk about how data lag is one of the issues that we still have in EB5. But these are pretty conservative projections that we put up, where demand is staying more or less constant, but it could be a little bit worse than this, in the sense that there's even more filings than we're seeing here in our projections.
Yep. And I think as you notice the trend line, if you take out that one big pop with the filing fee increase, and let's say you spread that across the 3 to 4 months after, you can see a pretty steady increase per month, where in 2023, it was in the low 200s to the high hundreds. 2024, it's going up in steady state in the 300s to 400s if you strip out that 1 month. And then as you see into 25, it started in the high 400s into the 500s with data that we know. And we expect that gold card, although it won't be a 1 month pop like March of 24, it'll likely be similar in magnitude and just spread out over a couple months, where we think there's going to be in the 600s in terms of filing for the March, April, and probably even May timeframe. So just overall demand is definitely going up. Rural does seem to be outpacing urban for now, although it's already kind of past the point where that really matters in terms of the high unemployment. There's already too long of a backlog for slightly reduced current filings to make a huge difference. So yeah, this is what we're seeing and what we would expect. And whenever we get the next round of data, we'll see. But as Ahmed mentioned, data lag is a big issue. It took a while for the official data to come out from the first quarter of last year in terms of the fiscal year. Even though we got the FOIA request, it could be many months before we see the real impact of January, February, March, April, in terms of just seeing this gold card. I mean, it could be 5-6 months from now before we see that full impact of how it played out.
Right. And I also would add that, it kind of makes sense, right? I think for those of us who have been in the industry for a long time, when EB5 works, it really does gain momentum. As more and more people file and obtain their green cards, they tell their friends, family members, there's more testimonials, there's just much more data that investors can rely on to make a really informed decision. And that has played out over the last 3 years as investors who first filed. We have a lot of investors who filed kind of in late 2022, early 2023, that have now completed getting their 526E approval, that have obtained their green cards. And as they tell their friends and family, and kind of even just the broader EB5 community, that is bringing EB5 as more and more of a popular option to the forefront for a lot of folks who are stuck in long backlogs in other categories, or just looking to get to the States and have a green card here.
All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the prior data and then some of the projections that we made. Mike, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, so before we were working with incomplete information, as we usually are, and trying to gather just approximations based on what Customers Bank and some of the banks are seeing, just like IIUSA does their analysis based on what members are showing, just to get a good sense of where things stand. So you can see where our projections were on the top. So you can see where we were at from our prior estimates to today, where we were generally accurate in terms of what we were looking at and directionally correct.
Yep, exactly. So we had projected that applications would stabilize at about 400 I-526Es per month, and the actual data, 7-8 months later, ended up being about 445 per month. So pretty close, plus or minus 10%. And this is just a good example of how we can, extrapolate from incomplete data, but still have a pretty good idea of what a potential impact is going to look like in terms of additional rural and urban visa demand from investors looking out into the future. All right. Ahmed, do you want to walk us through some of the high-level conclusions based on the newest data set that we have?
Absolutely. And I'll kind of, frame this conversation in two kind of subsets. One is, what does the long-term kind of expectation hold? And then what does this mean immediately for everyone who's thinking about EB5 today? So for the first two blocks here, just thinking about that slide that we showed a couple of slides ago, talking about, how many visas are already in queue, how many green cards already need to be issued. You're looking at a pretty significant delay for Chinese or Indian investors in the urban TEA set aside. And this is, again, purely based on just math. And we understand that there can be variables, but a lot of the variables that have been brought up over the last several months with regional centers that are just selling high unemployment projects, they're starting to just not make any sense, right? There was a lot of noise like, oh, rural is just going to super outpace urban TEA, and urban TEA is going to be more available. That hasn't happened. It's been 2 years of kind of hearing that narrative. We've also heard a lot of narrative that like, oh, it's kind of a top-down approach, and leftover visas from the unreserved category will kind of filter down to these, and rest of world won't use the set aside green cards themselves. And we've kind of seen anecdotal data, if you look at adjustment of status data that's available on the USCIS website, that's not necessarily true. Rest of world is using a lot of the set aside visas, and we're not getting a lot of trickle down from the unreserved category, because guess what? A lot of those visas are still going unused, or a lot of those green cards are going unused. So I think it's better to stay conservative and set expectations correctly. And I'm sure, your attorney will tell you the same if you're a prospective investor, that, yeah, let's think about this kind of as a worst possible case scenario, be realistic about what that could look like, and then hope for the best. Obviously, we all want everyone to get their green cards much, much sooner. And I think this is something that may or may not be addressed, for example, in 2027 when the program is reauthorized. But today's reality, and the reality that all EB5 investors have faced for the last decade, is there are backlogs. There's a lot of demand, specifically from two countries, and there aren't enough green cards available to those two countries' foreign nationals to satisfy all that demand. And this is extremely relevant in urban TEAs, where there's only 1,000 of these visas available after the first full year, where we have a little bit of closer to double because of carryover. Okay. Now, does that mean that rural is not backlogged at all? Absolutely not. We see enough people waiting in line that the rural backlog also exists. But based on the numbers and based on how many green cards are available to be offered in that set aside, you're looking at a much shorter backlog of only about 2 years. And you could even say, okay, maybe it's a 3-year backlog. Fine. That's still going to get you your green card probably in less than half the time that it would take in an urban TEA project. And keep in mind that these backlogs, specifically for Chinese or Indian investors, this is where a lot of the demand has come from for the EB5 category. If you're a rest of world applicant, basically from any other country other than those two, you're likely not going to have to worry about these visa backlogs at all. And so, yeah, what that means is, like I said at the very beginning, that your long-term kind of timeline does not change today, right? Any new data does not kind of change what your long-term outlook looks like. You are going to most likely have a little bit of a delay in getting your green card. If you're going into a rural project, this means a shorter delay. If you're going into an urban TEA project, this is going to be a longer delay. And you have to weigh that delay against the benefits of whichever project it is that you're looking to invest into. What does this mean today for investors that are looking to invest? Well, luckily the visa bulletin has remained current, and I think the IIUSA conference that just happened in Houston, one of the key points that was kind of shared by Charlie Oppenheim was that, and he used to be the head of visa control at Department of State. One of the key points that he brought up is that there's just USCIS and Department of State are not getting through enough applications and issuing enough green cards to create a backlog appearing on the visa bulletin. Now, we can extrapolate that further and say, okay, well, when are they going to do that? And are they ever going to do that? And the answer is, I don't think that that's 100% the way that Department of State looks at it, right? They've given us the warning, and we'll talk about that already, which means they're looking at total demand, they're looking at filings, and they're not just looking at approvals. But at least in the short term, what this has done is it's allowed people to continue to concurrently file. So those investors who are in the US in a variety of categories, they're able to take advantage of concurrent filing, lock in an adjustment of status, get an EAD and an advanced parole, a work permit and a travel permit, and start living their lives in the US as they wait for the green card. And this kind of creates a very interesting conversation around these backlogs and how much you really care about them, depending on the project that you want to get into. So I'll kind of stop there. I know I've said a lot, but yeah, one of the nice things so far is that the visa bulletin has remained current. Some folks are predicting that it will stay current through this fiscal year, which ends in September. If you want to be more conservative, it could even be as early as next month that we actually see a retrogression or a backlog occur. I think that's pretty unlikely. But for the time being, at least, you're still able to file a concurrent application and get your EAD advanced parole and obtain a new status in the US while you wait.
Perfect.
Exactly. And I just reiterate, we don't know when backlogs will officially appear. Based on the notice that they put in the bulletin in January, we thought it was very likely going to happen quickly. It looks like they're waiting a little bit longer until there's actually enough demand to put that in. But yeah, just overall, we see the numbers. You can see the numbers. It's all out there. We can't guess exactly what happened in the last few months, but now that we have almost 3 years of real data, we have a good sense of how long these waits are going to be for green cards.
All right, perfect. All right, let's shift over to some other just commentary on this same thing. Ahmed, do you want to jump in first?
Sure, and we've kind of talked about a few of these things, but let's just kind of dig in a little bit deeper. So, yeah, we've gotten so much better. I think, from where we were even just 5 years ago, in terms of data available to investors. We're now, through the efforts of organizations like AIIA, through law firms, subpoenaing or not subpoenaing, FOIAing the government. That includes Wolfsdorf, Galati, a few other firms, Clasco as well. We have a lot more data available, but we still don't have everything up till today. So the best thing that we can do, and I think that was why we shared that slide about our projections and kind of how in line that is with reality, is all we can really do is take the data that we have, which lags a few months, and then try to project what happens after that. So this is still one of the things that we're working on with the government. I know there's a lot of efforts behind the scenes to get better information, but I think we've done a really great job of this over the last 3 years of just arming investors with information, with data, with projections that are based on common sense, that are based on real-time data, and then asking them to then make an informed decision. One of the things that kind of plays into that is when there's a big month or a big period of high filings, right? We kind of knew that in March 2024 we were going to see a gigantic number. We just didn't know how big it was going to be. Same thing for the first 3 months of 2025. President Trump. First, we saw kind of a lot of demand in January because the stock market was extremely high, and people who had RSUs or just were investing in the stock market suddenly had a lot more net worth than they did a few weeks before, and so that pushed a lot of demand forward. But then also once the president announced the gold card program or changes to immigration law, birthright citizenship revocation, a lot of investors started making the decision after sitting on the fence for a while to move forward. And so we're going to see that demand, but we're not going to see it for another 6 to 7 months officially because of the data lag that we just talked about. And then, yeah, I think I kind of mentioned all the different narratives that we hear in the industry in terms of, the backlog won't be that bad, yada, yada, yada. I just don't buy that. I think you really have to look at the data. You have to make an informed decision, and you have to know that there is kind of a best case scenario, but there's also a worst case scenario, and you kind of have to plan for both and obviously hope for the best, but you have to be prepared for kind of the worst case as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Ahmed. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and what I'd add is, as we've gone through the RIA, I would say obviously the investors that got in at the start were in the best position at avoiding the backlogs, but they didn't know how well the RIA was going to work versus pre-RIA EB5, which was taking many years for 526s to be adjudicated. Now we've passed, we're either in or right past the sweet spot where, applications are getting processed quickly, 9 months to a year for many of our rural 526s. We're up to almost 350 approvals already. Everything's working great. The adjustments are working, but we're now getting to the end of the RIA where all of a sudden we filled the pipeline for those set aside visas, and we're going to be back to waiting for green cards even after approved. In the rural category, it's not going to be a massive wait, but there will likely be a wait already. High unemployment is going to be very long. It all depends on how fast we can get through the old China backlog for that to really play itself out for exactly how long it takes. But I'd say that we're now at that tail end of the good days where there's no backlog in the visa bulletin, so we can still concurrently file. We know that it's not going to be too bad of a wait in the rural category, but if you fast forward a year from today, I think it's going to be a very different conversation where the visa bulletin very likely will not be current anymore, and you can adjust status in either category. And you know that you're going to be waiting, let's say 3 to 4 years in rural or 10 plus years in urban, depending on how fast the rest of the backlog gets cleared out. So I think that we're in still a very good position where the program's still working efficiently, smoothly, and it's still a great opportunity. But once a couple more things fall, it's not going to be quite as attractive of an opportunity as we have today for the program.
Yeah, and I'll say that this is in no way meant to be kind of like a doomsday. Oh no, it's going to be so bad. There's a long backlog. You're just not going to get your green card very quickly. This is really meant to say, look, EB5 is still worth it if you're considering. At the end of the day, being in line is better than not being in line at all. And people who have been waiting for their EB2s to become current for the last 6-7 years, when it's only been just a couple of months away, will tell you, yeah, that line is just not moving, right? And so getting in line at some point is still better than not being in the line at all. And who knows what changes we're going to see in 2027. There very well could be a lapse in the program for maybe a year or two with a new administration coming in. So there's a lot of different factors here, but the grandfathering clause that protects investors that file now, the fact that USCIS is processing a lot of those legacy filings much faster than they were in previous years. The fact that Department of State is issuing more green cards than they have in previous years. All of these things are progress, and the program continues to get better and better for investors. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm with Mike on this one that, the sooner the better. And definitely there's no time like the present in terms of EB5, because, it seems like we just blinked. The RIA passed yesterday and we're already into 2025 with just 2 years left in the RIA. So yeah, it's there's no time like the present.
All right, let's spend just 1 minute quickly, Ahmed. Tell us about this visa bulletin warning, and then we'll spend a few minutes talking about the most impacted categories of investors.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got an entire video about this that's up already. So if you have questions about how the visa bulletin works and what's happened in the past, definitely check that out if you're looking for a little bit more information. But in a nutshell, the visa bulletin tells us that there are or there are not green cards available for specific countries in specific categories. And one of the nice things that the Department of State does is they don't just kind of all of a sudden issue a backlog or a retrogression. What they typically do is provide some kind of warning on prior months' visa bulletins, and then you basically end up with the visa bulletin kind of backlogging or retrogressing a few months later. So we got that first warning back in January, and we don't know if it's going to happen in a month, in 2 months, or 3 months. It's been a few months now, and we haven't seen any retrogression actually occur, which is great. But this does signal to us that the Department of State is looking at the total number of filings, looking at the total number of green cards that need to be issued and that have been issued, and they're understanding that demand is definitely outpacing supply. And that's where this warning came from, that it may become necessary to establish final action dates during this fiscal year. And if not this fiscal year, it's possible, it's very possible that it will happen in the next fiscal year starting in October.
All right. And let's talk about specifically Indian and Chinese investors as well, Ahmed.
That's right. And so we talked a little bit on one of the previous slides about who's really impacted by this. It is more than likely just going to be Indian and Chinese investors. What basically changes when a cutoff date appears in the visa bulletin is that Indian and Chinese investors, if they are included, which they should be, they will not be able to file an adjustment of status concurrently. Okay, so let's say you're in an H-1B status in the US, the date retrogress, a final action date appears in the past. Let's say it's March 2024, just for our purposes. And you're now filing in May of 2025. You are no longer current, as we say. And so you'd still be able to file your 526E, the EB5 application, but now very similar to how you have an I-140 where you can file that, but you don't get really any benefit out of it. Same thing with this EB5 application. Until those dates progress, and let's say you filed on May 10th, 2025, until the date that appears in the visa bulletin is either that date or later, you won't be able to file your adjustment of status. And there's 4 pretty big disadvantages to that. One, you don't get to lock in your children's age, which happens pretty much immediately when you file an adjustment of status right now. 2, you don't get new status in the United States. So if let's say you lose your job in an H-1B, you are now subject to that 60-day grace period. You have to find another employer sponsor to be able to remain in the country. With a pending adjustment, you don't have to worry about that. That pending adjustment actually gives you status in the United States and allows you to stay here. And then probably most importantly for a lot of people, not having an adjustment of status concurrently filed also leaves you out from getting the EAD, the employment authorization document, and the advanced parole, which is the travel document. And so you don't get that immediate benefit of having more flexibility to work wherever you want, to live wherever you want, to travel without visas. That's kind of the big downside there. So what does this mean? Yeah, getting in before a final action date appears on the visa bulletin is probably paramount if you're an Indian or Chinese investor, especially if you're in the United States. Now, if you're overseas, a lot of this just doesn't affect you because you don't concurrently file anyways, right? So from China or India, the timeline is continuing to kind of lengthen because of the impending backlog. But because you're not filing adjustment of status from overseas anyways, you don't have to worry about that aspect of it. So for both of these, what's the advice? If you're Chinese or Indian, the sooner the better, right? But if you're in the US specifically, you really want to beat. There's a tangible difference between getting in before a cutoff date appears on the visa bulletin.
All right, great. All right, so for potential investors, Ahmed, can you walk through kind of the couple initial steps for those interested in pursuing EB5 today?
Absolutely. And, we talk to a lot of investors every day, and a lot of the times the call ends with, well, what are my first steps, right? Should I be signing up with the regional center? And that's really not your first step. In fact, a lot of times that ends up being investors' last step, right? Choosing the project and kind of putting the actual money into the deal. The first step really should be hiring an immigration attorney. You definitely want to make sure that you've got an attorney in place and you're not trying to hire someone last minute when everyone else is also trying to file their application, right? A lot of firms will reach capacity. They won't be able to take on new clients. And you may have loved, an attorney that's done videos that you've seen, or maybe helped one of your friends file their application, and you reach out to them too late. It turns out they're no longer available. You really want to avoid that. The other thing with attorneys is, and we've got a bunch of videos on how to choose the right attorney. We've got a lot of materials on our website about which attorneys, what criteria each attorney should be presenting to you. But also, you want to make sure that that you're speaking with an attorney that is that you're comfortable with, right? That is understanding of your situation and is not just going to pass your case off to someone who doesn't know what they're doing just to get a filing fee from you or get a legal fee from you. So super important. It doesn't matter which project you choose, you're going to need an attorney. They're going to have to do your source of funds. That's definitely step one. Step two, once you've got that attorney in place, is getting all the documentation together for your source of funds. A lot of people, and in fact, I would say 90% of investors that we talk to, they think that their source of funds is going to be very easy. Oh, it's all earned in the United States. I've got taxes. It's all there. It's going to be super easy. And as a former immigration attorney, I can tell you, it's never easy. Even when you've got, all the money being earned in the US with all the proper tax returns and W-2s, your money still enters your bank accounts, and no one's money is just sitting in a bank account doing absolutely nothing. It's moving around, you're investing in various things. There's other commingling of funds in those bank accounts, and all of that matters to USCIS. If you've got a HELOC or other financing solution that you're trying to work on, maybe you're trying to sell a property, all of this takes time, and this is what becomes a bottleneck in the EB-5 process. So the sooner you can hire an attorney, the sooner they can kind of guide you on what kind of documents you need, and the sooner that you start getting those documents together, the better position you will be to file an application before any kind of changes to the program occur. And then lastly, obviously just as important as all this is making a decision on which EB-5 project is right based on your immigration and investment priorities, right? You want to look at a few kind of general criteria. How important is the speed of getting a green card to you, right? Is that a major priority? If so, you might opt for a rural project. Is the opportunity to possibly make a little bit of money more important to you? Then you might be looking at an equity-based offering. So there's a lot of different things that you need to kind of ask yourself. And as you're gathering all those documents and working with the attorney, at the same time, you can be speaking to regional centers, asking them questions, doing due diligence. We always encourage site visits to projects. All of our projects are under construction. So we are often, having investors visit them to see them in person before they make such a large investment. You can do all this while the attorney is working on your documentation. And ideally, all those things kind of come to a head at the same time. The attorney gives you a green light to make your investment, and you have now chosen an EB-5 project that meets your goals, and you can then sign, subscribe, and wire the funds and immediately file your application. So that's how a normal process looks. The true bottleneck really is the attorney and the work that the attorney has to do on your behalf. So getting that part taken care of as quickly as possible is super, super key in making sure that you have a timely filing.
All right, thanks, Ahmed. So as we talked about earlier, being in a rural project has significant advantages. You get faster filing and access to a larger visa set aside, which we've illustrated here. And since the RAA in our rural projects, we've seen a clear trend in a reduction in the approval time. So over time, you can see we've had over 340 I-526E approvals in our rural EB-5 projects. And you can see kind of the trend line is that as the government has gotten used to the new rural category, that processing times in general have kind of trended down. And so we're seeing a lot of recent approvals in less than 12 months. One other thing that's kind of important, relevant as well, is just the project approvals themselves. Before an investor can be approved for their I-526E individually, the project itself has to have the Form I-956F approval, which is the exemplar approval for the project itself. And you can see that we've been very successful in getting these approvals, particularly recent ones, in just a few months. All right, Mike, do you want to walk us through some of the current rural and urban projects that we have available today?
Sure. And as you'll see by looking at these, we've gone away from the one-size-fits-all approach. We believe that every investor has different priorities depending on lots of different factors. So we've worked to create unique offerings that fit different investor profiles while all still being highly attractive projects. So the first key decision most investors are making is the rural versus the urban category. And on the rural side, we have 3 different projects. 2 of them are the standard loan deal, and 1 is the preferred equity deal with a higher preferred return. So on the loan deals, we have our Rocky River project, which is the next version of our Twin Lakes project. This is another over 1,000 single family home development. This one's right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. This is Rocky River Phase 2. The Fund 1 was already approved with a 956F, and this is a pretty standard loan deal with Coulter, one developer that we've worked with many times before. Our next project is our Tamarack project. This is 956F approved, and it is a loan project for a resort in Idaho that's already very far progressed, successful, and they're continuing to build more condominiums and homes and deploy the EB5 money. And the last deal that we have is a little bit different. Our preferred equity project in a rural area, the Sienna Valley Club, and this is a single family home development very close to the Vail and Beaver Creek ski resorts and close to the airport. There's already homes under construction and homes there, and this is one that offers that higher annual return because you are going into the preferred equity portion of the project and not debt. On the urban side, we have several deals, all with Coulter. Two of them are loan and one equity option. One Tampa is the vertical project that we have right now, which is a condominium project that's already under construction and should be finished in under 3 years from today, assuming no major construction delays. And it is 956F approved. The Terracea project, we just released it recently. It's a second multifamily deal. We just did one with Coulter. This is the next project that we're doing with them. Very straightforward, 3-story multifamily project in Florida. The 956F is approved and construction starts next month. And for this project, we have both the loan and the equity options depending on investor profiles. So as you can see, this is 6 different projects that we have in market right now, and 4 of the 6 are approved and 1 has an approval on the prior phase. So we like to have our projects pre-approved and to really have that menu of options instead of only having one project and saying, this is the one everybody should do. We know that investors do have different preferences and we want to have an option that fits them, that's still high quality, under construction, with a great developer.
Yep, exactly. Everyone is going to have a different sensitivity around return, timing, capital back, and speed of green cards. So we try to have a variety of options and then let investors pick the one that's the best fit for their situation. As we mentioned earlier, our website has hundreds and hundreds of videos and blog posts about how to select a project, what items to focus on during the diligence process. Some of those most popular posts are illustrated here as well. And that concludes the materials for today's webinar. If you have any questions about any of the data or would like a copy of these slides, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to share them. This video will be posted on our YouTube channel in a few days along with a blog post and transcript. And if you have additional questions about any of the different projects that we discussed, please reach out to our team and we're happy to schedule a time to discuss your particular situation and answer any questions that you have. Mike, anything final to add?
No, just appreciate everybody's time. We've been very consistent with providing these updates based on when new data is available. Nothing shocking in the most recent data. It's just gone according to trend, and we continue to expect volume will stay high on trend with what we've seen. And if you're interested in EB5, there's no better time than now. So please reach out to us and let us know if there's any questions.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And for investors with questions about the immigration process, timing, and how to get introduced to a few immigration attorneys that might be a good fit, please feel free to reach out to Ahmed. He's been in the EB5 space. He is an immigration attorney himself, and I'm sure he'll be happy to connect you with a few different options.
Yep. Thanks, everyone, for your time today.